Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's 9 o'clock, a little after 9, and we're going to do Vesperisms. It's been a little while. It's been a couple weeks since I've been with you, and that's because I had a huge manuscript revision to get in, and I just could not spare the time. So, hey, good morning. Thanks for joining. So this morning we have a lot to talk about, and I really want to encourage you guys to please join the conversation. Don't let this be a monologue. I don't enjoy just listening to myself talk. So we have today to talk about the Pittsburgh shooting. And we're just gonna go there. I encourage you to ask your questions, make your comments. Please just join me in this, okay? I have a few things to talk about, and I'm gonna just turn my mic down here. It seems to be a little high. I have a few things that, a few questions to answer and a few things to talk about, and hopefully help you to have some language for why this happened and what we can do about it moving forward. So I want to start actually with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. So the shooter in this case, whose name I will not mention because I do not want to give this person any glory, one of his main targets or impetus for taking this action was his anger with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or HIAS. And I wanted to just talk about this because I think that HIAS really kind of shows something really important about the Jewish community and about the Jewish ethic. Why would Jews support refugees? So HIAS is an organization that started rescuing Jewish refugees from Tsarist Russia and Soviet Russia, and then moved on to rescuing Jews from Nazi Germany and resettling them, mostly in the United States. I guess in the United States. So, but now the main crisis of refugees is not other Jewish people, but other communities around the world. And HIAS has sort of shifted their focus from Jewish refugees to refugees around the world. So why would they do that? And I think that really speaks loudly about the Jewish ethic. So there's a scripture in Leviticus that says, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." So what this is saying is that when somebody is in your land, this has nothing to do with the border dispute or open borders or immigration policy or anything like that. It's saying when there's somebody sojourning with you, when there's somebody that's in need, you treat them as yourself because you were once in the same position. And I think that this is really central. Certainly, when I was growing up, this was rehearsed every Passover. It was like, you were slaves in the land of Egypt. Remember. And it's because remembering your history and learning from it, it's vital. It's, and paying it forward in empathy toward other people, recognizing that we are all human beings created in the image of God, so that those who were once slaves or refugees help others who are in the same position now. So I just wanted to frame that as the opening to this conversation, because it's really important to understand a central tenet of who the Jewish people are. Okay? So today I want to talk about the anti-Semitism, the nature of anti-Semitism, where it comes from. Now, this is not going to be exhaustive. The Vesperisms thing that we do here is 15 minutes. So this is by no means exhaustive, but I want to begin unpacking this over time, because it's something obviously very important to my work, writing historical fiction and with what the night sings. But it's important to me because of what we're seeing in the world and how this is expanding and even exploding, I would say. So I just finished a 6-week online course with Yad Vashem called Anti-Semitism from its origins to the present. It was a fantastic course. I think it had some inaccuracies in it, which I can talk about later, but overall, it was a real eye-opener. There was a lot of history that I did not know, and I thought I knew a lot. So I'm going to try to share some of that with you as time goes on, but today we're just going to do it in a nutshell. All right. So where does anti-Semitism come from? So this is a hatred that is the world's oldest hatred. I think we need to understand that. Like, this did not begin with Nazi Germany. It certainly did not begin with Trump. Anti-Semitism is a millennia-old hatred. And that's for several, I hate to say reasons. It's because it's unfounded. But it has its roots in a time where the world was mostly made up of tribal configurations, not necessarily nation states. There were empires. There was, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, Mesopotamian Empire, the Babylonian Empire. There were these empires, but a lot of history at that time was tribal. And so you had nomadic tribes, and when they would intersect, they would have conflict. And so fast forward, to about 70 AD, when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and we had what was called the diaspora. So when Jerusalem was destroyed, the Jewish people, by and large, there's still, some remained in the land of Israel, but there was a diaspora into the surrounding lands. So other lands in the Middle East, up into Europe as well. Now, because this was like they were seen as outsiders in these new lands where they lived. And that sort of never left. That identification of the Jewish people as foreigners or outsiders never really left, because, first of all, they were monotheists in these lands where, polytheism was still quite rampant. Let's say in the Roman Empire, and in the, Germanic tribes, they were mostly polytheist. So this was a very kind of unique and different thing to have a monotheistic religion. All right. Then you have Christianity. Now, Christianity it's a complex topic as regards anti-Semitism, because as we know, or maybe even don't know, Christianity was founded it wasn't even founded as a different religion. It was a sect of Judaism. There have been, different sects of Judaism that have believed in different messianic figures. Jesus was one of those. But Christianity was the one that sort of took and stuck. And in its first, 200-300 years, I would say the most of the Christian community were of Jewish origin. This slowly, as it expanded into, out of Israel and into the surrounding regions like Asia Minor, more and more people who were Gentiles started believing in Christianity, and it kind of dispersed from there. And what happened was, especially after, I forget what year it was, 330, I can't remember, someone can correct me, but especially after Constantine codified Christianity as a state religion, it began to really get away from its Hebrew roots. And the further that Christianity got away from its Hebrew roots, the more actually crazy the theology became in a lot of areas, not just as regards the Jewish people. So we really need to remember that and understand that Christianity is not a medieval religion. Christianity has its roots in the Jewish faith. And the further it's gotten away from that, the more wacky it's become. All right, so fast forward to the medieval times, and Jews, because they were seen as the foreigner or the other, they were not allowed to have certain jobs, but they were allowed to work in areas like finance, which, think about the term tax collector. I mean, even now, the IRS, we don't want them coming around. And if you've ever been audited like I have, you don't take favorably to people who handle money, or the perception of people who work on Wall Street is that they're dishonest, or whatever. So because the Jews were seen as foreigners, they were allowed to have that job, which was like had a lesser reputation, let's say. And so that is where that association with Jews and money comes from. It's because they were not allowed to have other jobs. They were kept out of different, other occupations. Okay. And that kind of otherized them further. They weren't allowed to live, in certain areas. There's so much I could say about this, but I'll leave it there. So they were always kept as a separate other in the medieval world. And in many Western countries, the Jews were actually kicked out of those countries several times on several occasions and fled to Eastern Europe, where they had a little bit more of a sanctuary. They were still kind of an other, but they had a little bit more sanctuary there. And that's why the Jewish population, let's say in Poland, Ukraine, was so much larger than in Western Europe. All right. I want to say just one more thing about Christianity, because so much anti-Semitism stems from especially medieval Christianity, but I don't agree with the assessment that anti-Semitism is inherent in the New Testament itself. I think that kind of reading is actually anachronistic, meaning, taking what you understand. It's like a backwards reading. It's revisionist. The New Testament was largely written by Jews to Jews, and I think it's really important to understand that. Again, it's as the church distanced itself from its Hebrew roots that it started to get off into wacky territory. And this also was concurrent with the Jewish community, with certain innovations in the Jewish community, like the Talmud. And so those two things sort of separated. They had a divergence that wasn't just one-sided, let's say. They were pulling away from each other. Okay. So that's like the very, very nutshell about the roots of anti-Semitism. There are other roots of anti-Semitism. There's Islamic anti-Semitism, which unfortunately is quite rampant. But I'm not going to touch on that today because we're dealing with a right-wing white supremacist who did this awful thing. That's the kind of bent that's the stream we're kind of taking here. All right. So when does anti-Semitism really tend to emerge, and why? The thing that I discovered in What the Night Sings in my research, as I looked back through the history of Jewish persecution of the Jews, is that it like I said, it's 2,000 years old. This isn't new. And it more or less has happened in cycles of about 70 to 100 years. It tends to happen, let's say, once a generation. There would be a major persecution of the Jews. And it especially tends to happen in times of social upheaval, especially if a culture is degenerating. So this is why the subject of anti-Semitism is so important. And by the way, I'll use the terms anti-Semitism and Jew hatred at the same time, because sometimes we need to really feel you can kind of get lost in this term anti-Semitism, but really what it is, it means hatred of Jews. So at times of social upheaval, when people are fearful, either their governments are not acting right or there's economic downturn, people tend to be unwilling. We all are like this, right? People tend to be unwilling to look at their own contributions to that downfall, especially in a democratic society. It's one thing if you're in a monarchy and you have no control over what the government is doing, but when you're in a democracy and it's starting to fail and, you had control over that for quite a while before it started to degenerate, people tend to be unwilling to look at what they may have contributed to that disintegration, and they want to externalize blame and externalize and displace their rage, and it's because of fear. Now, I've been in situations where someone in my life got afraid and started to give way to that kind of fear, and I'll tell you, it's destructive. Fear is absolutely destructive. It's not like just like you cower in a corner and get afraid. No, it's like when you get afraid of something, you're like a caged animal and you want to go like this. You know, you want to scratch and bite whoever comes near, even if they're coming, you know, with food, because you're so wrapped up in your fear. And this is, I believe, and you may agree with me, you may disagree with me, but I think you'd probably agree with me, that our culture right now is so full of fear. We are so afraid of each other, whatever side we're on. It's like the right's afraid of the left's afraid of the right, you know, and it's causing us to make these crazy decisions, whether it's, you know, I'm sorry, but like Donald Trump is our president. I don't really want to go there, but like, that's a symptom of something crazy, you know, like that didn't happen in a vacuum. That really happened due to fear. People were afraid and they lashed out. So, whatever group you belong to, take a minute and think of your perception of the person who's opposite of you. And if your knee-jerk reaction is to be angry, enraged, or afraid of that person, you're externalizing blame and displacing your rage and your fear. And we can all do this. This is endemic to humankind, okay? The other aspect of this is loneliness. And just as we are in this crazy time of fear, we are also in a time of unprecedented loneliness, largely due to the fact that we do not do our relationships in person as much as we used to. There's not as much intersection in our society as there once was. I mean, you might, I think even in the workplace, it's much more homogeneous. It's not. I think in the workplace you don't tend to see. Oh, hey, John. Oh, hey, Derek. Nice to see you guys. We're talking about anti-Semitism, its roots, and how it plays out. And I'm talking about right now why anti-Semitism tends to emerge in times of social upheaval and fear. And one of those aspects that I was just talking about is loneliness. Again, we have a really deep problem with loneliness because we're not integrated in the way that we were even 5 or even 10 years ago. We're just not intersecting with people who think differently than us, or look differently than us, or worship differently than us. We just don't have that. As much lip service as we give to it, we don't have it. Anybody who disagrees with us, we can just block on our social media and pretend they don't exist, and we otherize them. And what that does, because we don't have like the influx of other people's different perspectives, and we're not intersecting with each other as much, we're in an epidemic of loneliness right now. Suicide rates are going up. And the thing about loneliness, we can't underestimate it, is that it is ultimately destructive, just like fear. It's ultimately destructive either to ourself, either we're going to do things that are unhealthy for us, or, you know, people turn towards self-harm, or God forbid, suicide, or it's going to be destructive to others. We know about this killer that he was a loner of loners. And he externalized his rage and his blame onto a convenient scapegoat, which for him was the Jews. All right, so just really quickly, what are some of the common tropes of anti-Semitism and how do they express themselves today? So we talked earlier about where, for instance, the trope of the greedy Jew comes from, because of them being restricted from different occupations and being, you know, allowed to be in finance, which was seen as more of a dirty job. And so that developed this theme of the greedy Jew, or the money pincher, let's say. And so that plays out in all different ways and developed into this trope that we almost like don't even think about until we hear the crazy version of it, right? Well, it's all crazy, but of the Jews control all the banks, or the Jews control all the media, or the Jews control all the entertainment. And what that eventually developed into was this forgery in the 1920s done by the Russian government called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which millions and millions and millions of people in the world believe is an actual document. I encourage you to look it up. Just go to Wikipedia. You'll get the basic gist of it. It was purported to be the minutes of a meeting of a cabal of rabbis or influential Jews that wanted to take over the world. It's so ludicrous and so delusional, but it has its roots in this belief, okay? There's then the trope of the blood libel, the bloodthirsty Jew who wants to poison the wells. This is in medieval times. This was a belief that Jews poisoned the wells, or Jews caused the plague, or the biggest thing is that is the belief that Jews would murder Gentile children in order to make use their blood to make their matzah. I mean, it's crazy, but some of the ways that this plays out today. Some people actually still do believe that, but like some of the ways that it plays out today is that, Jews are uncompassionate, for example, to, or that that Israelis, this is a big one I hear, that Israelis kidnap Palestinian children and harvest their organs. I mean, it's ludicrous. Or that, there is crossover between the Jewish community at large and the belief about Israel, but like this thought that Israelis just indiscriminately go and kill civilians because they're bloodthirsty. The crazier the belief, the more you can, it's worth like tracing that back. Okay, this is not the same as legitimate criticism of other governments, of the Israeli government, for example. But when you start to see that it's this sort of like exclusive belief that this one group does this crazy thing, right? So this killer, for example, one of the reasons that he went after HIAS, or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, was, that he had this trope in his mind that the Jews were this destructive force. And it comes from these medieval and earlier beliefs about the Jews being greedy or bloodthirsty, or looking to destroy societies or take over the world, or playing off of another thing that comes up is like that Jews play off of the affections of others, or they look for sympathy in other nations because of the Holocaust, for example. Like they play the victim card. Okay, so that made me extremely uncomfortable to talk about. It's so crazy making that like it just, I'm feeling that in my body very awfully. Okay, so now I just want to end. If you have any comments, by the way, or questions, I really don't want this to be a monologue. I really want this to be a dialogue. If you've encountered any of these tropes, any of these libels, if there's something that you didn't know, like maybe you had heard something all your life that you thought was legitimate, but now you're like, oh, I wonder if that's actually true, please comment or DM me later. I'm really interested to know what you guys have encountered. Or if you are Jewish and this has you've been the victim of one of these libels, let me know. Okay, so I just want to take the next few minutes. I know this is a longer Vesperisms today. Excuse me. But it's important. And again, I'm going to be kind of unpacking this as we go along. But I want to talk about how we combat this. Okay. I've spent the last few days since the shooting on Twitter, on Facebook, just trying to get a gauge on how people are talking about it, especially how people in the Jewish community are talking about it from different aspects, whether it's rabbis or writers for different magazines or, New York Times opinion columnists or whatever. I just want to see what people are saying. And what I can definitely say for sure is that there are multiple opinions within the Jewish community. There's no one way that the Jewish community is processing this. So if you don't find consensus, don't be put off by that. That's common. One thing I learned growing up in a Jewish home is that you hash things out. You disagree, and sometimes you disagree vehemently. And there's a very old saying that 2 Jews, 3 opinions. It's like we hash things out because it's about the questioning, it's about the wrestling, and you do it. You do the hard work, and you get in the trenches, and you emerge with a little bit more clarity, right? So don't be put off by that. Okay. The other thing I want to encourage you is that to make the differentiation between a straw man and a steel man. What that means is a straw man is like when you take the worst of somebody's position and you argue with that. What you want to do is create a steel man. You want to understand where somebody's coming from their best arguments, and wrestle with that. There's a lot of rage flying around as people search for answers because this shooting is so multi-layered. It deals with guns, yes, and it deals with white supremacy, yes, but and it deals with politics on some level. But it also happened to the one group about which we've said never again, right? We thought that the problem was largely solved. Talk to anybody in Europe, this problem is not solved. It is emerging in even larger ways. And I hope that the United States is not going to follow in Europe's footsteps in terms of, I hope we're not going to rise to that level of violence that's happening there. But yeah, this problem is not solved. And it won't be. It did, like I said at the very beginning of this video, it didn't start with Trump. It didn't start with the Holocaust. This is a millennia-old hatred. It's the oldest hatred in the world. So it's not going to disappear tomorrow. And, another layer of complexity is that it happened in a house of worship, which is literally supposed to be a sanctuary, Our houses of worship, we want them to be open. We want people to come in and feel welcome. We don't want you to have to go through metal detectors or past armed guards to be able to get into the sanctuary. That's crazy. So we're looking for answers because it's so complex. It's not just like, one crazy guy it's like it talks to different levels of like our engagement with each other and how we're going to move forward with this. Okay, so like I said before about loneliness and fear, like we cannot externalize our outrage without first looking for real factual answers. Like there's just so much emotion on Twitter. It's not helpful. Okay, we can hash things out, but like we're not going to find our answers on there. We've placed blame on politicians, but let's start instead. In terms of this one incident, we can start with the shooter and what he believed, and we can educate ourselves on the roots of anti-Semitism, and we can start to dissect like why people fall into racist and extremist ideologies like that. What was it about his life? What was it about his belief that drove him to become a beast? Okay? So in terms of combating it for ourselves, I'll tell you where I come from. My source for direction and guidance, no matter what it is in life, but especially when it comes to like the larger questions about humanity, human nature, these kinds of things, well, my source for direction and guidance and comfort is the Bible. It's not a popular source at the moment, but it's also not an archaic patriarchal screed. It's the foundational document of the civilization that you and I live in right now. The civilization that is right now crumbling before our eyes and falling apart. I believe that we've actually lost the cultural narrative that originated with the Jewish people. The Bible is the gift that the Jewish people gave us. And there's a reason, like I said at the very beginning when I was talking about the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, this way of remembering our history and saying, because I was a slave in Egypt and I was a refugee, therefore I act this way. We've lost that cultural narrative, and now it's just exploding emotion. And so I'd like to encourage you, whether if you're willing to rediscover or discover for the first time what the Bible has to say about humanity and about our responsibility to each other and about this God who is love. Love in action, not just love in emotion. God calls us into a conversation with each other and with him. It's not meant to be a monologue, even though I'm sorry, guys, I was really hoping for more interaction with you, but DM me, it's fine. But anyway, God calls us into a conversation with him this way and a conversation with each other this way. So my new friend, Rabbi Simcha at Hadass Synagogue in Brooklyn, I asked him this morning if there was anything that he would want to say to this discussion or this topic. And his one thing that he said was that it's about being around the dinner table together and agreeing to both agree and disagree. And I think that could not be more important. It is about the face-to-face, me sitting down with you in the room bodily and feeling what you feel and seeing what you see and hearing your opinion and you hearing mine, and agreeing that we're not going to segment from each other. We're going to really listen to each other. We're not going to make assumptions. We're not going to make quick assumptions, and we're not going to straw man each other. The last thing I want to say, and we're going to close up here, there's two people that I'd like to encourage you to look at. The first one is Derek Black. Derek Black is a former neo-Nazi, deeply, deeply entrenched in one of the sort of ruling families of that horrendous movement. He's no longer in that movement. Why is that? He's completely renounced it. He's even lost connection with his family, lost relationship with his family in order to leave that movement. So to him, escaping from white supremacy, white nationalism, and racism was more important than the connection with his family. That's radical. How did that happen? It's because several friends that he went to college, or several people he went to college with, decided to take him under their wing. These were Jewish people who went out of their way to get in Derek's life. And their what do I want to say? Their principle was, how can you hate me if you don't know me? And so they would invite him to Shabbat dinner. I mean, the Sabbath table is pretty sacred in a Jewish home. It's not common for you to invite a neo-Nazi to Shabbat dinner. It's just not. This was so gutsy and brave. And it worked because the relationship between Derek and his Jewish friends proved to be more real and more substantial than the lies he was believing. The second person I want to encourage you to look up is Darrell Davis. If you have Netflix, you can look up the documentary about him called Accidental Courtesy. It will challenge you to the core of your being. Darrell Davis is an African-American jazz musician who has made it his mission to befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, love him or hate him, and some do hate him. Again, there's not like a consensus. There's not like one way to look at Darrell Davis or Derek Black. But Darrell Davis has now managed, through friendship and through reaching out and being incredibly brave, to pull many people out of the Klan, to the point where he has a collection of Klan robes. This is so challenging. I understand. But when he convinces somebody to come out of the Klan, they give him their robe as like a trophy. that he's managed through love and relationship and listening and challenging. It's not like he just goes and is like, oh, could I be your friend? No, he challenges them. He challenges their beliefs. But it's with respect that they're a human being and that they're caught in a lie. These people are caught in a lie, just like this shooter was caught in a lie. So we need to get back to relationship, and we need to get back to facts and truth and history, understanding that, and not operating out of this crazy whipped up emotion and this like compartmentalization that like I'm in one category and group and you are the other that's in another category and group. No, we're human beings. We're each made with dignity in the image of God, and that is that. Period. Amen. All right, guys, thank you for sticking with me. I know this was a long one. Yeah, that is amazing, right? I think Darrell Davis is like a hero to me. He is a hero to me. He's very challenging, but I want to be like him when I grow up. All right, guys, leave me your comments in the DMs, and I look forward to just dialoguing more about this with you. The last thing I would just want to say is if there is somebody in your life, somebody asked me, I'm sorry, to answer this question, and I didn't put it in my notes here. What do you do if you know somebody who is caught in one of these movements? Well, the first thing you do is you don't pull away from relationship with them. You keep engaging them, and you look for the ways that you can love them, like you can lavish love on them and make them know that they are seen and heard, because the reason they're pulling away into these movements is because loneliness and fear. So that's the root. The second thing you can do is just educate yourself on the history of anti-Semitism, the tropes, the ways it expresses itself, both in history and in our day. This Yad Vashem class, you can take it for free, actually. If you go to futurelearn.com, it's the course Anti-Semitism from its origins to the present, offered by Yad Vashem. You can also purchase a license which allows you to just have access to it forever. But if you want to just take it within 6 weeks, it's free. So that's a really great way to educate yourself. But you can find a lot online. If you go to the Holocaust Museum website, you can find a lot about anti-Semitism and where it comes from and how it expresses itself. Just educate yourself so that you can have something to share with this person in your life who is devolving into that. But you go ahead and do the best good that you know how to do right now. Who is one person in your life that you know is lonely and feeling alone, feeling isolated and fearful? Reach out to that person, because you don't know how you don't know where their thoughts are going in that space. And you don't want them to hurt themselves, and you don't want them to hurt other people, whether in big or small ways. All right, guys. Whew. I don't know about you, but I need to go take a breather. All right. Love y'all, and thank you for listening, and let's keep the conversation going. Talk to you soon. Bye.